letter that a landowner would receive from the company, so that you'll be aware of how the landowner is contacted, what the company says about the project, how they explain it. So that's included in your folder today.
May I ask questions as you
Of
go,
course,
or should I
of
just
course.
keep a list?
No, you can. It's probably easier to have a dialogue and ask as we go.
All right. I've read this weeks ago when it was first dropped off. And it also, even though you're asking for permission, it also, I think, at one point said that if permission is not given, eventually you would have authority to just come in and...
If the project is approved, okay, so we have, and this is a 3-year process. We're looking for an in-service date in the last half of 2017. So it takes, and we'll explain it, I can kind of show you on the flow chart, but just the regulatory process in general takes about 2 years to go through. So we have public meetings, we have discourse, we have conversations with the landowners, we have all of these kinds of things that happen from asking to permission to deciding where the line will go to then eventually negotiating easements for a 50-foot permanent easement. That's how much the easement would be at the end, but we start with a much larger study corridor so that we can see if there's wiggle room to move in different things. There may be land uses, there could be agricultural drainage tiles, there could be septic tanks, there could be any number of things that might be on a particular property. And that's what we would talk about when we go and actually talk to them, to the individual landowners, on what their land is used for, how do they take care of it, what's going on with it, and what might be a good constructible route through this particular area. If the project is approved, and if they still have not granted access or survey, or we've not been able to negotiate an easement, the Certificate of Public Need and Convenience that is issued by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission does come with the power of eminent domain. For the Natural Gas Act, it's very different than an electric company or a road. For us, it's just a valuation system, and by that I mean, if the project is approved and someone does not want the pipeline on their property, we go through a legal process that is basically the judge sets a fair market value for the 50-foot easement to construct, operate, and maintain the pipeline. The landowner is compelled to sell those rights. The company is compelled to buy those rights. So it's a purchase, not a take. It is not in fee. It's just an easement for the 50 feet to construct, operate, and maintain the pipeline. So that's what the end result is. It's valuing what that strip is worth in an acreage format, basically. That's the computation or the calculation, is what the price, what the value of that acreage is to construct, operate, and maintain for that easement.
My next question then, do you ever enter into agreements with counties for negotiations? For example, last year we went through a county-wide reassessment. It was court-ordered. And people came in, and if they had utilities that ran through their lines with easements, they would present documentation. It's 50-foot wide, it's 100-foot wide, whatever it is. And we had to make an allowance for that and reduce the value of their property. So do you ever make up the difference that the county loses in revenue for taxes and the schools and
Not typically, because we don't own the land in fee. The landowner retains ownership of the land.
But it's reducing the value to the county and the schools and the municipalities.
Well,
And so we're losing tax money because of the pipeline coming through. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but we have no, we've researched this across the United States, and we have not found, for our easements, we have not found a reduction in property values per se nationally.
Well, that I can tell you, having, and I think my colleagues would, I can't speak for them, but we have had to reduce values based on the fact that easements went through properties when there was documentation to prove it.
Typically, you are allowed to use your property the way it was before. Now, you can't build a pool or a deck or something like that over the pipeline. But generally speaking, farmers can still farm over it. We bury the pipe deep enough for deep tilling, those kinds of things. So we typically try not to change, basically, the way the land is used.
Okay. Then the next question is, who regulates, I understand there are some rules on the books, and I'm not sure under whose jurisdiction they are, and can the local municipalities have their own sets of rules and regulations for setbacks from schools, from houses, from businesses.
We can work with you, so in a federal process, those things are recommended, not required. We try to work at those levels. If there are certain things, and we can look at, where the line would go and all of those kinds of things. The nice thing, again, about a greenfield is that we don't have existing infrastructure. So that's what we would want to hear from you. When we get into it a little bit more and we have more detailed, drawings and those kinds of things about where we think the line would go, that's the time to have those conversations. Can you move it here? Can you move it there? And those kinds of things. And that's what we work with individual landowners are, and what we would work for, I'm going to say, what we call areas of congregation, like a church or a school or those kinds of things. We try to stay as far away as we can. I can't promise you. There's nothing on once we go into service, I think the setback with PHMSA is only 1 foot. I mean, we don't follow that. We try to stay at least 25 to 50 feet away from any structure. But in areas especially in areas where we already have existing infrastructure, you have to understand that we only own the rights to construct, operate, and maintain within 50 feet. And in many cases, especially in our existing infrastructure, not here, but existing infrastructure, people have built right up to the edge of our easements because land is land is land. So PHMSA can't really regulate where the pipeline was there first and people have built directly up to our easement. Here we have the luxury of being able to work with landowners and local officials and local municipalities to try to find the best place. We just met this morning with Annville, and we know that there's going to be an industrial park in part of the area on one of the pieces of property. As long as we know that, we'll meet with the developer. We'll try to understand if they have already subdivided or already done some things with the piece of land. Then absolutely, we'll meet with the developer and try to make sure that we stay as far away from them and they stay as far away from us. This is the time to work through those issues. If there are existing things, then that's what we want to do.
So National Diversity Index is done, but what about, we have a lot of nesting bald eagles in the area. There's laws about staying away from those nests and things. So all that will be.
Yes,
that's under a federal act. So any federal species certainly will be covered under all of those regulations. We'll also put into consideration the state listed species as well. There are a couple in this county that fall into that category as well. The Ferc, their process takes into, the Ferc process cannot supersede any federal act. So anything the Fish and Wildlife has out there on something sensitive, whatnot, Clean Water Act, all of those things, we uphold those almost strictly to exactly the way the law is written that way. With the state, it's a little bit different, but we work with the state agencies to come up with the best way to deal with their species and crossings and whatnot to try to have, to minimize impacts for those as well.
So it's first to avoid. If we can't avoid, it's to minimize, and if we can't minimize, then it's to mitigate. And so those are the things that we work on through the NEPA process. Again, we're going to always try to avoid. If we can't avoid, then it will be minimize and mitigate.
Then how, I see you're going north to south, and from my knowledge of the Swatara Creek, which is our major waterway through the county, you're going to be crossing the Swatara. Is this an above ground thing? Is it are you drilling under the stream? How do you get from one side of the Swatara Creek or any other body of water?
There are several crossing methodologies. We look at each water body separately. It depends on how wide the crossing is. It depends on whether it's deemed as an environmentally sensitive crossing. There are any number of things that we look at, but there are pretty much several different methods. We can do a dry crossing. We can do a horizontal directional drill under the creek bed. It never goes above. The pipeline will never span the creek. It's going to be buried in some way, shape, or form below the creek bed. Oh. And the way that it goes that way is the different methodologies to get the pipeline under the creek bed.
At a minimum, if a stream is actually is applicable and we are approved to actually do an open cut on a stream, there's a minimum of 5 foot from the bottom of the bed to where the pipe can be. A lot of times it ends up being deeper, but it can be no shallower than that. If something is drilled or bored, then usually it's
much deeper.
10 feet 25 feet, up to, depending on if it was something major. That particular crossing, and granted, this is a line on a map, so this has not been microsited, tweaked, and we haven't done all of the assessment on the streams, but from the desktop that we've looked at, I can tell you we are crossing that, and there are 7 tributaries in the county to that stream that we would cross as well. It looks like the particular crossing we have of the stream itself is a warm water fishery, which is a good thing. If it turns, after we do our surveys and whatnot, we'll find out exactly what's in it in that particular spot, because each stream in different segments have obviously different classifications. This particular crossing, from what we've seen, does not have a high evaluation on it for this particular spot. That doesn't mean that it couldn't have a higher one just a half a mile down or a half a mile upstream. So until we get onto the ground, and we won't know the different, the specifics until we get there, and we'll have biologists that will be looking to see exactly what's in it. That is considered a pretty, from the size of it, and just, we look at all the different streams and which ones are higher quality versus not quality, regardless of designation, and this has been on our list the whole time.
I believe in being straight up, and I want to tell you that clean water is my passion, and this year will mark the 26th year of our Swatara Watershed Organization canoeing and cleaning up the Swatara Creek, which is a source of drinking water for 3 water companies in our watershed. And I will be watching it, and so will a lot of people be watching this very closely. And I'm not threatening, I'm just saying this is our backyard, and we are very in tune to everything that goes on that Swatara. And we want it, if you're going to do this, and we have no choice in the matter, we want it done right.
And the way to do that is certainly talk to us, that's one thing, but there's also a more formal process that you can go through, and we encourage every community, every landowner, everything to participate in the public process. And if you look at our federal regulation, kind of the flow chart that kind of outlines, it's in your packet, it's sort of, again, this is the time, we haven't entered any formal proceedings yet, but the first formal proceeding is called pre-filing. So it's a pre-environmental review of the project. It's when the state agencies come together, municipalities, everybody makes their comments. It's the time to sort of listen to those particular issues, understand those issues, make recommendations regarding those kinds of things, make recommendations on how we would cross certain areas, what methodologies we would use, all of those kinds of things. It's the time for public meetings. It's the time that Ferc also holds their scoping meetings. So basically what happens is we tell Ferc we want to do the project, we enter the pre-filing process. That process has to be at least 6 months, but we've allotted about a year for that process. So we'll have probably about 45 days, 30 to 45 days after we enter the pre-filing process. We'll invite people to an open house. We'll have company representatives there from engineering, project management, land, environmental, safety, operations, engineering, every kind of discipline that it takes to put a project together. We bring company representatives to answer questions. It's very informal. You kind of walk around the room. You can talk to any of those people that you're interested in talking to. There's not really a formal presentation. It's more just to be able to look at the maps, get a better understanding of the project. The next thing that happens for public participation is the Ferc scoping meetings. We don't know how many they will hold for a project of this size. It will be an environmental impact statement, not an environmental assessment, especially because a large part of this is greenfield, so we understand that will be the case. They will hold scoping meetings. Again, they will decide where and when and when those occur, but it is a time that is a much more formal process where they sit behind a desk, very similar to where you are. There are microphones. People come and make comments on the record. It's not a dialogue. The company does not answer questions. It's really a time for interested stakeholders to put their comments on the record. Now, you can put your comments on the record anytime, but this is a public forum in which to do those. So a lot of people come to those. But like I said, it's not a dialogue. It's not a question and answer. There's a court reporter there. It's very similar to a regular hearing.
I've been through a Ferc hearing in the past, and the outcome was not, necessarily all that we had hoped for.
Well, they're kind of frustrating for people who come and want more information and want to have a dialogue, and there is no dialogue, and you can ask a question and FERC will just not answer. It's a very frustrating thing for people. They try to get people to understand what it's all about, but most people who come do not understand that nuance of a hearing. They think a hearing is a hearing where it's a two-way communication, and it's just really not that way. The company makes a statement, we read a statement into the record, but they do not ask us to answer any questions. What we do is, we usually come an hour before the scoping meetings, and we'll do almost a mini open house. So we will have already had the open houses where people can look at the maps, but let's say somebody wasn't able to come to the open house in their particular area, then we have the maps out on tables in kind of a separate room away from the FERC about an hour before the hearing starts. So we allow that to happen again. So there are land agents there, there are company representatives there. So it's kind of an abbreviated time frame where you could do that again, and then you can go into the hearing. And then typically, depending on how long they last, and depending on how long we have a venue, we will sometimes stay afterwards if people have questions. But we just don't do that Q&A during the hearing time. It's really their meeting, not ours.
What's important, if you don't mind me saying, what's important to know, and it's hard on a project like this where it really is going to be multiple years. We've got 2 years through the permitting process. We'll have a year in pre-file. We'll have at least a year during the permitting phase. And it's everybody has lives. I mean, you hear about the project a lot at the early, and then things kind of lull because everybody's getting things together, and then the application comes out, and then there's another lull. So there's like this long period of time in between. But what I can share is that, and sometimes some people know how the FERC process works really well, and some project managers come out and do very good on explaining that to the public, and some aren't as good as others. But during the pre-filing phase, it is on the company, on us, all the comments that come in through scoping, we have to address every one of them. We have to give FERC an actual filing of our responses to everything that's come on the docket, and that's during the pre-file phase. And all of that gets put into our application the best that we can. And when someone gives a good comment, we try to address it. If we can't address it, we say why we can't.
Or that we don't know the answer at that time. Many things they'll want answers to things that we may not know at that time. It takes time to design the project, answer the questions, figure it all out. So that is a source of frustration too, because people want answers and they may not get exact answers right when they want them. It may come later in the process once we've gone through all the engineering and design.
The open houses and the scoping come very early, and it really is that data collection part of it. So then everybody wants to come and they give you this information. Well, then we go back and we analyze, and then we put an application in. Then it usually takes FERC anywhere from 4 to 6 months to get a draft EIS out. And then that's really where you really get to see we've collected data, FERC's analyzed our data and now has a document. Well, that's probably going to be a year and a half into this process. That DEIS is really when all of the data has come together. So coming to that comment period, there'll be a comment meeting after the DEIS comes out to come back, and FERC will ask everybody to come, and it's kind of like their scoping meetings, but this is actually to comment on the DEIS. That's where you're going to see details about. One of the things, I know you said water quality was an issue for you. It's a minimum requirement from FERC that we have to say if we're crossing any streams within 3 miles of an intake of, say, a drinking water supply. So that's something we would have to analyze. You probably would not physically see that unless you read our application, which would come a year into the process, and then see how FERC analyzed that maybe 4 to 6 months later in the DEIS. So there's this long chain of having to keep up with the project, and you'll get lots of things from us.
It's kind of like a funnel. I'll say, if you think about it, in the beginning, we don't have a lot of answers, but the funnel is wide, and you have a lot of input, and you have a lot of time and effort and energy is spent putting and gathering those comments. As the project continues to get designed and designed and designed, the funnel gets a little smaller and smaller and smaller. So the opportunity for input gets smaller and smaller because we've gone much further in the process. Not that it's not there, it's just that we can be much more flexible at the beginning. The hard part is getting people engaged early in the process to get that information and get that thing so that when you get further in the funnel, you've already gathered all that you can.
I'm engaged, okay? To your comment about the water quality, it is water quality, but it's also scenic beauty. It's also the fact that Swatara Creek is recognized by both the state and the nation. It is a water trail for the state, and it is part of the Captain John Smith National Water Trail as well. So I want you to have that information up front so it does not get overlooked. In addition, you said you can go within 1 foot of any structure. That means we're going to have increased risk for emergency management. Are you willing to help out
Of course.
funding with emergency management? Because you know what? Our taxpayers should not have to put out a lot of money because we have a whole new pipeline and we have all this increased risk of safety for our people.
So what we do is we typically, on a project like this, we'll do a grant program. And emergency response is a huge priority for our company. So typically what we've done on other projects is we will set aside a certain amount of money and we will offer grants for community improvement. Typically the projects we've funded things in the past, let's say they need new turnout gear. So they would apply for a grant for turnout gear. They would apply for a grant for, maybe they need an off-road vehicle that
How about a backup 911 center? I mean, that's,
Yes,
you
that
know,
would be
that's a
absolute-
real need.
Of course, we understand that. We
Turnout
understand
gear
that.
is
Now, we
one
may not be
thing.
able to fund everything on that, but certainly there are grants that we would fund through our grant program that would go for those types of projects. So we do environmental projects, we do emergency response projects, we do any number of those kinds of things. Because we haven't even started the project yet, I don't know all the details of the grant program, but typically that's what we would do, especially in communities who don't know us, who we've never been there before. It's also a way to sort of, establish some good relationships as far as being a community partner. That's what we want to be. And that's one of the ways that we do it, is through a grant program. And yes, we are planning to do one, but please allow us the opportunity to come back once we've entered the process and those kinds of things have been a little bit more set.
Can you talk a little bit about the thickness of the walls of the pipes? I understand this is like 42 inches or something.
42
It's
inches,
huge.
yes.
Talk
And
about,
What, Perry, you've just gone beyond my area of expertise, so I'm going to let the
There is a
engineers.
formula that you follow, and is provided to us in CFR 192. That's also part of the federal guidelines. But there is a formula you place, and you consider pressure, the temperature, where it's located. It might be located in an area where there's a lot of people, maybe located in an area where there's very little people. So there are a lot of factors you place into this formula, and it spits out a wall thickness for that pipe.
are you telling me that it's going to be different thicknesses in different areas of the county?
Yes, and also there's, before we
Could be,
place into
could be,
service.
yeah. Doesn't mean that it wouldn't, but
Yes.
it could be.
Yes. And before we put the pipe into service, we do a test on it as well. So we fill it up with water, and we actually do a pressure test. And we test it to, we always say about 1.5,
1.5 times.
1.5 with operating pressure. Here the operating pressure for this line, CPL, Central Penn Line, is 1480. So 1.5 to 1480 would be the range of the test. And then after that's done, then we drain the pipe and we place it to service.
And we have a very, very, very intense pipeline safety and pipeline integrity program. That's one thing that we do with the emergency responders. Not only do we try to provide grants for them for additional gear that they might need, most of them are volunteer fire departments all along our system. Not all, but a lot. Certainly, and certainly in this county, we know it's probably volunteer fire departments. We understand that they're not always well funded. We understand all of those things. But one thing we do, because they are very interested, and when people are scared, they're going to call 911. So we want to make sure that the emergency responders know about our facilities. They know what we do to monitor the health of our pipelines, what we do to keep them safe. So basically in the beginning, what we'll do is probably on a county-wide basis, we'll work with you, but I think we mentioned this to Jamie last time, is trying to pull the volunteer fire departments together. Certainly initially, once we get into the process, and we'll do a dinner or a lunch or whatever works for the particular communities, and we'll do a pipeline safety and integrity presentation for them. We'll teach them what we do. We'll teach them how we fly our route. We'll teach them how we walk the route. We'll teach them all the things that we do for pipeline safety and integrity. Then we want to introduce them to our operations folks so that we can start the relationship. So it's not just a name and a number to call. It's a person that they will know that will be responsible for the operations of this particular line. That starts that particular relationship. Then we try to meet annually with us because we know chiefs change and different volunteers will change. So we do an annual training. We can do it online. We can do it in person. Again, these are just the things that we do on an ongoing basis to help them understand sort of what our role is if they're in the very unlikely event there was an incident, what our role would be, and typically that's We're gonna have operator qualified people touch our facilities, and then what the role of the emergency response would be. Crowd control is not what we're experts in. They are experts in crowd control and those kinds of things. Ingress, egress, they're gonna understand that. We understand our facilities. So that's what we try to teach them and work with them on, so that we have this ongoing relationship. Long before, hopefully, nothing happens, but in the unlikely event that it did happen, that they already have a relationship with our people.
Talk to me about ASAs, ag security areas, and preserved farms. How do you treat them?
Typically, we will look at those. We'll take it on a case-by-case basis. That's one of the reasons why we want survey permission and we want to start talking to the landowners. It depends on what the preservation is. Sometimes people just say, I pledge to keep this farmland and not do any sort of residential or any kind of development on. Because our system and the pipeline does not change the land use, you can farm right across from it, it doesn't change the use of that particular land. So it may be that that easement doesn't really come into play. Sometimes there are different kinds of easements. So we will work with each particular landowner and try to work through those and understand if their land is in some sort of preserved easement of sorts. I don't know the answers to all those. We have looked and we've done sort of a cursory look and know that easements exist or preservation type things exist, but we don't know the how restrictive they are and those kinds of things, and that's what we'll have to do on a landowner by landowner basis.
Okay, just go back to Perry's on the wall thickness one. On that calculation, when you take in all those factors, then you put a safety factor on that, and so it's good to know that the pipe at no point will ever even come close to the 100% of its capacity. So even in the most
strength.
conservative area,
Design.
even in the most open areas, you're still going to only get like, was it 0.72 of the design
And
factor.
you'll
So-
find in our specs that the wall thickness that we actually use is actually, it exceeds the CFR 1.
I have not heard the range of wall thickness. Do you measure in millimeters, or how do you measure, and what is
We usually use inches.
Inches.
inches of thickness? And can you give me the range?
It could vary. For example, for horizontal directional drills, it could be larger. I think for the largest one we use 1 inch. Could be
Right,
more
it may
than
go
that.
from 0.6 inches up to an inch,
Yeah.
depending upon the area, how populated the area is or is not.
Underneath roads where we bore, those may be concrete encased as well, and also the wall thickness of the pipe will increase as well.
And how about sinkhole prone areas? Is there any
Karst
shoring up?
topography is one of those things that's again what we need some more information. We can get some information from websites and geologic information, but until you really get out there and start talking to folks and understand that, we're running into karst topography on another project that we're working on. If we cannot get through there, then we'll route around. I mean, again, those are kinds of things that we just have to look at. Our engineers have to really get a very good understanding of that particular topography. We're not going to construct something that we don't feel is safe, nor are we going to construct something that, even though it might be constructible, if we don't feel that it's safe for the long haul and we can't get in there to maintain it and do what we need to do, then we're going to find the route that is right not only for construction but operation and maintenance going forward.
And see, that's part of looking at your, taking the bird's eye view and looking at your picture. In my mind, the reason they go east-west and north of Route 422 is because it's shale. South of 422, it's the karst topography, and sinkholes are abundant. And that's why I don't understand how you're going to accomplish this, and I'm anxious to hear and follow your
And
plan.
we will keep you in the loop, and certainly, again, that will all be part of our environmental documents. We have to document that. We have to say how we're going to get through certain areas. We have to. It's a very, very, very rigorous process of siting.
And if you have to go through karst topography, is there any other safety?
You might horizontally, directionally drill. You might go deeper. You might do a bore. You might do some different kinds of things that would get you and again, a lot of times we have to go around it.
Do you drill and put pylons underneath to give it strength to hold it vertically, like you would be putting up a building?
For buildings we will, but for the piping we won't put in piles. We will put.
Is the pipe heavy?
Oh yes, it's heavy.
Very heavy.
Of course, with the increased wall thickness, it will be heavier.
Well, we have a road, our main route, 422, we have to build a bridge and, span who knows how long underneath the ground But do you build bridges and then lay the pipes on bridges?
Underneath we don't put anything above ground. Everything's gonna be
No,
below
I'm
ground.
talking a bridge underground to support the pipe with the pylons going down.
We have what we call sleepers. It's basically big concrete mats that you place the pipe on top depending on how far. Based on soil conditions, we'll place sleepers appropriately to keep the pipe from sinking.
Sleepers. I'll have to look that up. I've never
That's
heard
just
that.
a term we use. Basically, they're just concrete blocks.
How big are they?
It varies. It depends on the pipe size. So we have standard drawings. It could be 5 feet, could be up to 6 or 7 feet. Usually the size of the pipe will determine the size of the sleeper.
And how long are they? It's one section.
I've seen some about the size of this desk here, some smaller.
10 feet?
It just depends. There's calculations that go into each size of the
All
sleeper.
right, well, you guys got your work cut out for you. I know that. It's not an easy task to cross a whole county.
It's not an easy task to build a pipeline of this size in any part of the country, believe me. That's why it takes not only so long for the environmental and regulatory review, but for our engineers to truly design it and get out there. We go landowner by landowner, we look at all of the different factors and land uses and issues such as karst topography, all of those kinds of things. I mean, that's the information that we gather. So that's why when you see this it's really hard. We have to start somewhere, and that is the line on the map, because we have to start the dialogue in some way, shape, or form. But please understand that once we get out there, this line we'll do alternates, we'll do alternatives analysis, we'll do any number of things to try to find what we feel like is the best route to be constructed, that minimizes the environmental impacts, and that is safe for operations and maintenance as we go forward. It is a very, very, very big undertaking. The cost for this project is about $2.6 billion, and as you can see from our timeline, it takes at least 3 years to get through all of both the regulatory process and the construction process.
And you're not the first pipeline to come in here and tell us that you're either going to come through or expand or whatever. How many more of these are out there, A? And B, do you guys ever work together to take one, so it's not disruptive continually all across the county, but maybe share one easement? And
We typically do not share right-of-ways, no. FERC encourages us to site in existing utility corridors if possible. By that it means, let's say there's an electric utility line. Adjacent to that, we would never go, we try not to go under the line, plus an electric utility doesn't really like us under their line, obviously. So we would try to stay adjacent to the utility corridors as much as possible. That's why where we have existing infrastructure, siting next to our existing infrastructure is exactly what FERC asks us to do.
But
Because
not other pipelines, like
Not other pipelines.
electric is what you're talking about.
electric, it could be
Water.
it could be another pipeline, but again, we're going to be offset enough from that, that it's not going to be directly next to it. There can be some utility corridors that I can't tell you that we haven't ever, because we have looked for those in the past. That's what we're going out to look for right now. Again, we can see some of that from the air, but we don't know where all of that is. But to work together to, our customers are our customers. We're not probably going to, unless it's a joint venture with another company, you wouldn't find us, working together with another company unless we were joint venturing on this particular project and the customers were the same.
I asked a lot of questions,
Sure.
but I had a lot of questions.
Of course,
so,
of course.
I apologize.
What else can we do? I know this is probably new information. If there are other questions that we can take on either the process or the time or sort of our next steps, how you would like us to communicate with you going forward, if there are other stakeholders that you would like us to visit with, certainly your emergency response and the county emergency management office or team, we'd certainly like those names and numbers and make sure that we...
Hazardous materials response team as well. They're part of our
Absolutely.
EMA.
Absolutely.
Commission?
Just quarterly updates or something?
Well, we typically will update you on the milestones. So we're going, so once we enter the process, you'll be on our mailing list, you'll get mailings, you'll get those kinds of things from the company so that you understand sort of that. Quarterly, you might get one that says, we're just working on the design. So the next milestone would be invitations to the open houses. The next milestone after that would be invitations to the Ferc scoping meetings. And the next one after that is that we filed our application. The next one after that is probably that the draft environmental impact statement is out. Some of those will come from the company, some of those will come from Ferc. Sometimes you'll get it from both.
Commissioner? You're good? Gordon, or Jamie, I'm sorry.
Could you said you were with Annville earlier today.
And North Annville, we were with
North
both of them.
Annville, okay, just to paint a picture a little bit of this route. Union, East Hanover, is that?
Yes, I can pull them
And then
out.
going south, I guess,
Uh-huh.
from South Annville,
Let's
South
pull this out
Londonderry?
right here. Yes,
Okay.
South Londonderry, South Annville, North Annville, East Hanover, Union.
Okay.
and we can't promise we'll get to every township before we actually enter the process, but what we're doing is we're meeting with as many as we can. We've had a little disruption because of the weather, our flights, we come from Houston, and so we've had a little bit of, we haven't been able to go quite as fast as we would like to go with the weather the way it's been lately.
It's been a
But we're-
cold winter.
It has been good for natural gas, actually. We're making phone calls. We're going to meet with as many folks as we can. If we can't meet with them, we will make phone calls. The whole point is that the landowner letters do not go out before we've had some substantive conversation with each of these communities. So again, we love face-to-face. If it's not face-to-face, then it's a phone call. They get the materials like this. We emailed it to them so that they have some idea, and then we follow up with a meeting. So it doesn't all happen, we hope that it all happens as much as possible, but we try to do everything we can to make sure they have the information before landowners receive the letter.
And are you looking at state game land or any sort of wilderness land? I mean anything like that that's a concern?
Well, we try to avoid state parks. We try to avoid those things if we can. In the Pennsylvania Game Commission, we already have quite a bit of right-of-way across Game Commission lands. So they are an agency or group that we've worked with in the past. Again, we do try to avoid it if possible. If we can't avoid it, then again, we work with those particular, whether it's a state agency or state, those kinds of things we would do the exact same thing that we would do with any landowner, negotiate, work through the process, and go forward with that.
And Jamie, I think since our first meeting, our line has slightly changed.
We are not in Spatara State Park anymore. I know that was
We're
kind of,
not.
no.
Because this
We
map
brought
looks
it-
like it is.
It's just south.
Just,
They have a new one.
the
When
new
you-
one that's in your
If you
packet.
see
Our packet,
the
we
job
had
that
before,
comes,
Yes,
That's
comes out.
updated?
yes, that has been updated.
Okay.
It looks like it touches, but it does skirt it.
Yes.
It's kind of hard to see, and of course, until we get on the ground and actually have it fully mapped out, and we have, all the land has all of their data to make sure we know where the
It is our
boundaries are,
intention
but
to
the
stay out
intention
of
is to
this,
stay south
stay out
of
of the
it.
park.
And then that goes over to where the Appalachian Trail crossing is. But
Right.
we've avoided a lot of the state lands that were there too. The original route that we had, as soon as we found a better crossing of the Appalachian Trail, we were able to do this.
And that
actually
is
avoid
what happens a
multiple
lot.
things.
We start with a line, but once we continue to look desktop, once we continue to get information, the first time we met, certainly Jamie brought that to our attention. We took it back to our folks. We understand those sensitivities. We understand all of those kinds of things. That's the input that we need. The line that we start with rarely is the line that we end with. I mean, we make tweaks and we try to make, adjustments as much as possible. I don't want to promise that we can do everything that everyone asks us to do, but we certainly take a look and we certainly take it back to the team. We have a group of engineers that their specialty is routing pipelines. So they're going to try to do the best to look through. We even found one in Columbia County tomorrow where we're meeting. We found a utility corridor that we're going to look at as an alternative. So those are the kinds of things that we do to really continue to look and get information. For the project that we just filed an application on, just to give you an example, it's in New York, it's 122 miles. We started with a line on the map, and over 50% of that line has changed based on stakeholder input. So the line that we actually filed in our application is 50%, 50% of it has changed based on that.
I do have a question. Go ahead, take John.
I was gonna say, John had his hand up.
Yeah, a quick one here. I'm just kind of curious in looking at this map. Looks like you could connect these stations here. It's not, it's a shorter distance. I'm just wondering why you chose this path as opposed to that one.
Well, for a lot of different reasons, most of which have to do with our customers and other interconnects along the way. So we're also trying not only to get from point A to point B, but it has to do with our customer makeup and what they're asking for as well.
Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner?
First of all, I want to say that I have a certain comfort level with your very capable presentation, and I'm certainly as concerned about the environment as anyone else, but I feel that generally we can assume that we're in safe hands with the federal and state regulation and a company that obviously has your expertise. The fact that you're in this business and have done this before speaks to the fact that you'll be able to do a job and protect the interests of all the folks in our county. My question deals with a more practical purpose, and that is there any economic advantage to the area and the folks that live in Lebanon County and in these municipalities?
We will do an economic impact study. When we get a little bit further and we have a little bit better understanding, we'll do a full-blown economic impact study. But typically speaking, when we so there's several different ways that the economic impact comes. It comes mostly, and the largest economic impact comes from construction. So we hire pipeline contractors who are very skilled in pipeline construction. Those workers that work there have to be operator qualified to be able to work for those particular companies. So we bring in skilled labor to do those jobs. Sometimes that comes locally. We try to go locally as much as possible, but that skilled, we don't always find that level of skilled labor in every community that we go through. The second is we try to use local contractors for things like, let's say we have to build access roads or we have to use gravel for access roads. We'll try to procure hay locally for soil erosion measures. We try to procure fencing, gravel, some laborers. If they're not skilled laborers, we do try to use those kinds of things. You'll see a bump in restaurants, hotels, any number of things that people use when they come into the particular area. As we travel, we just sat in a restaurant here in town, and when we travel, those are the kinds of things that you'll see in the time leading up to construction and all of our teams traveling forward. So those are the kinds of economics. So we try to procure as much locally as we can. If we can't find it locally, then we try to find it regionally. And then if we can't find it regionally, then we have to bring things in. Pipe, there's a pipe mill in Pennsylvania. For the last project we did, we bought 25% of the pipe from a pipe mill in Pennsylvania. So we do try to do those things as much as possible. So again, locally, regionally, procuring local goods and services. Again, the skilled labor is another kind of issue just because of the operator qualifications that we have to go through. But what we'll do is once we've commissioned the economic impact study, we will share that with you. And it goes down to the county level, not necessarily the township level, because it's kind of hard to say what a particular township would. But it goes through payroll taxes. It goes through numbers of employees, how much money actually stays locally, how much would, sort of eke out to the larger region, and some of those kinds of things. So we give data to usually a university that we use. We go to their sort of policy, economic policy type departments, and they will run the calculations for us. So we tell them how many construction workers we think in how many different spreads and how much time and those kinds of things. And they take that data and then extrapolate it into an economic impact study that goes for the region, but goes down to the county level.
And a follow-up question would be, what about long-term economic impact?
Long-term is a little harder for a linear project like us in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania doesn't have ad valorem taxes. We pay ad valorem taxes, I think, in almost every other state we operate, but Pennsylvania doesn't have ad valorem.
Can we take care of that?
So that is one thing but for above ground structures, we do pay taxes for those if there are any. We will have some operations folks in the area. I don't exactly know where they will. At this point in time, we haven't worked out, how many operations folks will need, but we will hire for those. And so taxes, payroll, those kinds of things are the long-term impacts for a project like ours. The real economic comes in a pretty short burst through construction. That's where you're going to see the biggest spike.
And how about, is there any economic impact that businesses who have not been able to hook on to a line, you have nothing to do with that, or do you?
We do, because since we are federally regulated, we have to, we're called an open access pipeline. So I think UGI is the local distribution company here. I think we talked about this last time. They're not a customer on this project, I will say that. But this is a line in an area that has not had a line in this area before. We're open access. That means that people can tap in, put gas in, or take gas out.
And could that be a business? In other words, the Amish market is not in East Hanover Township because they cannot get hookup to a gas line.
So it's a several phase process. So we are high pressure. Local distribution is low pressure. Okay, so you're going to have to do that. You're going to have to sort of you can't just put a tap in and take high pressure gas off and expect it to do what a home use or local, dairy farmers or any of those kinds of things might need. So UGI would have to come to us and they would have to say, and it's not really us, it is us for the facilities to facilitate that interconnection, but it's not us for the gas. So we don't own the gas, remember, we're like the trucking company. UGI would have to contract with one of the customers in this particular project to buy capacity from them. That is a possibility as long as they meet. It's a pretty expensive proposition. So here's what UGI would have to do. One, they'd have to enter into an interconnect with us to actually have the tap. They would have to have a meter station, a regulating station, which actually would cut the pressure to the pressure that they would need to serve their local folks. The metering is measuring the gas, the regulating is cutting the gas, cutting the pressure of it. Their distribution lines obviously would have to come to fairly close to where this particular location would need to be. And so they would have to have those particular lines. So they have to determine, is the load, or are the customers that they would serve at a local level enough to be able to pay for the facilities that it would take to serve those people? So it's a cost-benefit analysis for them. So open access, but if they meet our standards, let me just go back to that. If they meet our gas quality standards, if they meet our safety standards, if we can enter into those particular kinds of agreements, we have to allow those interconnects to happen.
Okay. Gordon.
I have no question.
Okay. Anyone else? Dennis?
No.
Chris?
Can you give me a ballpark estimate of, let's assume this project gets approved and you're ready to construct the pipeline portion in Lebanon County. Are we talking 6 months to do that? Are we talking 2 years? Are we talking 30 days?
No, probably
What's
9 months for the construction total. So the part in Lebanon County is going to be pretty, I don't want to say short, but shorter duration than what it would take to construct the whole project. Mhm.
Okay.
We try to go in a linear fashion. If you could just think about sort of a blank slate, and if you could go one right after the other, that's what we would like to do. We would clear and grade, we'd open the trench, we'd weld the pipe, we'd lower the pipe, and cover it back over in a linear fashion. Because of environmental windows, we can't always do it that way. Migratory birds, we have to make sure that if we're going to have to cut trees at any time, we have to do it at a time when the migratory birds are not nesting. Okay, but then the trout fishers, the streams may be a different environmental window. So for those kinds of things, we have to we can't do it as linearly as we would like to do because we have to follow those environmental windows. So in theory, it goes in a linear fashion. In reality, and depending on when let's say the approval came in the spring, well, we couldn't maybe cut some of the trees during that time. We might have to mitigate for cutting trees at a time that, those kinds of things. So those are the processes that we would look, and it's not an exact science on when we would get the approval. If we had our way about it, we'd get the approval right when it's time to cut trees, and then it would go in a linear fashion. It just doesn't always work out as nice as that.
Understood. I guess my only other, not necessarily question, but comment is, have you spoken to our GIS folks here at the county? Because I think they would have some data that would be very beneficial to
I'm
you and the
sure. We
project.
would love to talk to your GIS people in the county, very much so. Perry would probably be your contact for that. If there are those connections that we can make, again, those meetings can keep occurring and we can keep working through all of those issues. We're happy to have it. Not every county has it, but we're happy if we can make those conversations happen.
Very good.
Anyone else? If not, thank you very much.
Thank you. We
You're welcome.
appreciate your time very much today.